Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I've just been having a big cry. Had a bit of a conflict with a friend, and I felt to communicate about this because I came into some understandings that you can only really reach when you're in pain, and similarly to the inspiration that I feel I get inside. It's sort of like it takes you to a place where you have to get real if you want to understand something. So pain can be a similar thing to flashes of insight. So it was around my dad, and I won't go into all the detail of it for the sake of other people, but I was trying to express myself about my deep connection with my father and also the biological connection with your father, like you're their flesh, and realizations that I've had of how strong is that family connection, even if there has been problems in the family or there's been distance in the family because people are unable to communicate how they feel. We also get more complicated issues with blended families or even just when parents remarry. And I know a lot of people have experienced that. I'm not experiencing the remarriage from a child's perspective, which I think would be extremely hard, but it's more from an adult perspective where people who they are marrying, they may care about you, but they don't feel like you as a parent would. So there's that love can be less. And if you're not seeing them regularly, then you're not really having that family relationship. But what I wanted to convey today, and it felt important, which is why I'm doing the video, was the fact that we're not heard. It's not just my own case, it's everyone is not heard. And this does speak to the freedom of expression, not just as a UN appointed right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or a Charter of Rights. The issue of respect is another one, and that also comes through in the sexual harassment issues. Any conflict, you'll find there is an adversarial situation coming through that lack of respect, not being heard, not being understood, not driving to the heart of what the real need is, people blocking, standing in their truth, trying to be fair, trying to provide another perspective when the person actually needs to be heard. And insights that came to me were also in relationship to the homeless who are not heard. They are not heard. They're seen, but they're not heard because people are too frightened to approach them, or they blame them, or they don't want to buy into it. They're going to have a problem, etc. So I just want to go still for a minute whilst I connect with what it is I need to speak about. Sometimes we can't articulate the truth of what we're feeling because there's confusion around it. Another person can quickly fire something back at you, thinking they're understanding what you're meaning, but not understanding at all. When you're going into an emotional experience, words can often be at a loss to explain the intensity of the feeling. In the case of a father-daughter relationship, we're part of each other. The bond is beyond words. It's like, and it's not to negate other bonds that my father might have felt with others. It's not about that. In the moment of my own anguish and pain, it's to do with my needs in relationship to that loss or perceived loss. The truth he's living on in another reality, but I still have to process a whole lifetime. And it's interesting that the child comes up. I hear myself saying words I said as a child. I was extremely close to him as a child. He was the word go-to person, but I don't really like that term because it's very trendy. Oh, the go-to person. He was my best friend, like I said in my video. He was the person I went to when things got tough for me. I have a very strong sense of fairness, as he does. And I'd been challenged by those who I didn't think were fair. And so I used to go and sit in his office. He was a printer, and I used to talk to him a lot. And he was really great. He would hear me out, but he would say to me always, look for the good in the other person. So there's no wonder I have that sense of loving everyone. I can really thank my father for that, because he always made me, at times I didn't feel he really helped me in terms of really responding to what I was saying. He just directed me to look for the good in them. So he wasn't really a counsellor, but he embedded that in me. So going back to the insights I had with this friend who's another peacemaker, she's very much in alignment with me. But she also didn't know how to handle the moment either, because she's also a problem solver like me. We're actually very similar. The two of us would always say to people, look at the other side. We would always say, stand in your own truth. She's the mirror of me, actually. It's really funny. So I do get where she's coming from. But when I experience really deep trauma, because that's coming from areas where I'm not healed, were coming up, because I've had a lot of judgment in my life, particularly since I've had a lot of judgment, actually, not even since homelessness, even prior to that, because I've always spoken up. See, when you speak up, it's not an easy path, because people don't want to hear it. Unless you're in agreement with them, they want glee clubs. And glee clubs in conflict resolution is really about, we all agree and we all feel good when we agree. That's what we do Facebook. We get in with people who all agree with us. And if you don't agree with us, we become like the Colosseum in Rome. Down, off with their head, or we attack them. And even those in power would feel the same. They would be feeling under attack and wanting to attack back. They're human. We don't do conflict resolution well, but we also don't do, as I've said in previous videos, we don't do emotional intelligence well, because we don't know our own emotions. We don't know how to process. We've not been taught. Parents haven't taught us. I mean, I went and learned it because I'd had to learn it, because I also had conflict in my childhood. And I'm a person that wanted to understand why. So going back to the insight that I had, whilst my friend was, really projecting in a way that was fair, the need that I had that she wasn't able to recognise was to be heard. I just needed to be heard. I didn't need it to sound fair. I just needed to be heard, because I had to get that feeling out. Then once it's out, then you're in a position to actually sit down and go, okay, is that true? Then we go to question it. But people need to get their feelings out. And the thing is, we're in a world that's not letting that happen. We've got, you cannot get angry. If you get angry, it's abuse. And it's not. What abuse is, just so that people know this, it's a repeated negative behaviour. Now, where does abuse come from? It comes from inner pain projected outward. So then if someone's persistent in needing to be heard, they can be called a stalker. It's happened to me, and I wasn't. I was seeking to be heard, but I did it in a very polite way, and it wasn't 50 times a day. It wasn't every day. There was a lot of time between the communication, and it was always an appealing to resolve the conflict, because I had to resolve it. It was an emotional issue that I was having of unfairness with another party, and in my case, it was the feeling of not being equal, being treated like I didn't exist, and not being heard. So the reason I'm saying this is, I know that I'm not the only one. Most of us don't feel heard, because we're not seriously sitting down with another party to resolve that problem. We get defensive, we block them, we use legal means in order to shut down that opposition. It's totally toxic and unhealthy, and it's very embedded in our culture. I'm a very open-hearted person. I'm a very kind person. I'm a person who will sit down and acknowledge if I'm wrong. I'm a person that will really deeply listen to someone else. I'm also very emotional, you know. That's the way I am. I feel my feelings and I don't suppress things. But I'm not aggressive and unkind. You know, I would never want to hurt anybody in any way, but I do need to be heard. And I recognise that's part of being human. So what I was experiencing, and because whenever I go through any sort of emotional upheaval or trauma or desire to end my life or anything like that, I always see myself as part of the collective. I always have. Whenever I feel personal pain, I think of others, always. And you would probably relegate that to service to other. There's two types: service to self, which tends to be self-oriented. It's all about me. I don't care about you. And that's a disconnected mindset. They go off and do whatever they want to do, maximize their own happiness. The other side is the service to other. This is where we have social conscience, where we care about what's happening to people. And from a higher perspective, it's not to judge either side as better than or less than. It's just these are orientations. But they create a clashing it up, and people can get very wounded by these clashes. People also engage in a lot of judgment. They say, oh, well, you're a this and you're a that. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. In conflict resolution, we teach no more shoulds, no more shouldn'ts. Because the moment you say to someone, you should be this, you should be that, it's a very poor way of communicating, and it's an underlying communication that the person has done something wrong, they're not good enough. It reinforces a negative, and that negative reinforces powerlessness. Powerlessness can be turned inward in respect of the desire to finish or suicide, or it can be projected outward in aggression. I'm a peacemaker, so it's my job to know myself in order to assist and teach others. I have to know it in my experience. That's why I do the videos I'm doing, because I'm sharing my knowledge from lived experience, not book knowledge. So when I had that situation, issues that came up for me were being judged for being homeless. Another issue was unkindness that I had sensed in another situation. And that was a bit of a trigger for me, because I don't like unkindness. I get upset when people are engaging in activity that I think might harm another, or if I think that it's not kind. I feel it deeply. I'm a very sensitive person. And so that was there for me. And because the other party I was talking with wasn't recognising and didn't know my history, didn't know that there was more of a story behind all of that as to why I felt what I felt, her approach was to sort of try and get me to see the other side, but I wasn't able. I needed to be heard, and I needed to feel my feelings, because that pain needed to be moved through. Now, with healing, and this is what our society doesn't get at this point, is that people need to heal. All emotional pain must be felt right through to the very end in order for it to release. Now, when we shut people down, we say, shut up, I don't want to hear it. Go and get a job. You made your own bed, go lie in it. You're whinging and whinging about this. You're upsetting people by revealing these things. This is how we block communication from being heard. It's in our collective narrative. It's a programmed mind pattern that we've been taught. It's predominantly parochial, coming from the masculine, and it's extremely unhealthy. And it's why violence happens in the world. The moment we shut down the emotional field, we create a countering violent response. Now, that violence can turn inward in terms of self-destruction, or it can turn outward in terms of hurting another. But the real issue is not in so much the violence itself. The real issue is in the shutting of it down. So when we incarcerate people, put them in jail and say you're a bad person, there's a lot that hangs off jail. I mean, I've had the experience of homelessness and all the judgment and sort of latent belief systems that occur when you state that you're without a home or homeless, that label. There's all sorts of judgment that comes up for others, and they don't want to help you. So we're not getting sympathetic. If I had broken my leg or got cancer, there might be more sympathy. That's more acceptable. But when it's homelessness, it's not. So I'm using that as a contrast in that I have felt that social exclusion. I have felt the stigma of it. But I have chosen to confront this in truthfulness because I'm not interested in running in fear or feeling shame, even though there is shame around it. And I do get inklings of it when I speak it up, but I make myself speak because I'm living in the truth. I'm not interested in being seen to be. I couldn't care less. I'm just noticing the table's rocking because I've got my coffee here. I'm not interested in keeping up appearances. I couldn't care less. I'd rather have one friend than 1,000 friends who are seeing me in a certain way which is untrue. Not interested. I want to live an authentic life. I want to be real. I want to be who I am, which is why I'm speaking like this. So going back to those in jail, they get put through the court system. They often, particularly the lower socioeconomic, may not be able to access legal help. And then we've got the issue of lawyers and how they set up adversarial combat in order to win a case. So it's not about the truth being revealed through an interaction between two lawyers who are basically putting the case of each side so that the judge then can be in this neutral position to be able to evaluate what's true, what's not. And of course they have the rules of evidence, but evidence can be interfered with. If you've got an expensive barrister, this person can twist a situation in ways you can't even imagine. I've said in other videos that I was once a witness in a rape case, and I remember being grilled by a barrister on when I was called. I forgot what the seat that I guess it's. I was part of the defendants. Oh, not defendants. Defendant. The woman who was bringing the case had been raped by this person, so I was a witness on her behalf. So this person was being prosecuted in that court hearing, this man opposite. So I was called up to give testimony because I'd witnessed the rape. But what blew my mind when I was on the stand was how I was grilled to the point that made me feel like I'd raped her. And I'm a woman. It's like this barrister, he just badgered and badgered and badgered me. And I'll never forget it. It was a very powerful experience when I saw that he was not interested in the slightest about the truth. He wasn't interested in the healing of the woman. He wasn't interested in about justice, real justice, so that we live in a community where people are faced with the consequence of their actions and the pain and the hurt that it causes. And there is some sort of reform that happens within that person. I personally am no subscriber to punishment because to me that's just another form of violence, hitting out at someone, they don't learn and then they repeat offend. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in as a peacemaker is healing. So going back to the court and jail situation, in the courts, quite often a person can be unequal before the law if they've got no money. They get the legal aid students if they're lucky. Now, this is already an impediment. So if you're in a horse race, this is the horse heavily weighted in that race. It's like holding them back so that they will lose. This is not what justice should be about. Now, all judges should not be old men. We should have a range of professionals who have expertise in specific issues. And I know they are dividing the judges into certain categories. But I've certainly witnessed firsthand where they didn't have the experience. There was also status issues where they are seeing themselves in a certain status. They're not having had the lived experience on the ground. Therefore, they will be working with their own prejudices unconsciously. It's called unconscious bias. Now, if a person is uneducated, which may not be their fault, it could well be because, well, it's very easy to see the inequality even in education when we've got people paying for private education and then we've got public education. That in itself is the same thing as the horse race where the horse is weighted. If you don't go to the right schools, you're not going to get access to those positions that are going to give you the higher pay. So we've already got structured into our system inequality in that respect. So what happens to the person who fronts up to a hearing and they've got these aggressive lawyers who want to win because they get paid on winning, so it becomes a profit motive. And whenever we see profit motive in any sort of social service, we see great harm because the person is never served. Justice is never served. Sometimes it is, depending on that judge and depending on the lawyers, if you get lucky. But predominantly it's adversarial, it's about winning, it's a form of combat, and the outcome that only matters is winning. It's not about healing. This is a masculine design. It's not the feminine. The feminine wants to heal. So going back to that situation, that person's very vulnerable to those players in that system who are looking at angles. Person can easily find themselves in a situation where they get set up and they can go to jail. And I've certainly been in an experience where I've witnessed falsified evidence, falsified information to a hearing and it being permissible. And that was an awakening for me. I just want to go still on that because that's come up. Yeah, the key issue here is healing. It's not about winning, it's about healing. In my case, I had so many situations that have arisen where it's been totally unfair. There's not even a modicum of an attempt to make it fair. And you find yourself talking and talking and talking and talking, exposing your life to people. And if you're honest like me, you'll tell them everything because I tell the whole truth. I'm not a person that holds back. And it's because I give information in order for another to make a wise decision. I'm not giving the information so that others can use it against me in a future date in order to hurt me further. That's abuse and that's a form of violence, and that is what we as a society must create avenues where that doesn't happen. There has to be appropriate judicial forums or justice forums where cases are heard, like at the tribal level, and wise decisions are made so that people heal. What can happen to young men when they end up going to court is that their case can be delayed so that they turn 18. Then they go into jail. And I know of a situation where a young man, good looking, goes to jail and then he can be attacked in jail. The people within the jail might try and help him, put him in the library so he's protected. So further injustice happens in the jail. It's not going to reform a person, it's going to put them in with other people who have unresolved issues because they didn't know how to resolve their emotional problems that came about through poor parenting, possibly came about through poverty, came about through, role modeling in that society that values, really base things. We see a lot of violence on television where young men and women start to believe that in order to be safe, you have to be violent. We're seeing more female images of violence, which to me is unconscionable as a woman. I don't believe that violence is going to make a woman safe. It's going to put her in more jeopardy. because man is physically stronger. And not only that, she's emotionally going to really suffer from hurting someone. We can do it through verbal abuse. The verbal abuse can be even more damaging than physical abuse. The silent treatment is another form of abuse, where a person is completely ignored and their rights completely denied because that other does not want to deal with it. So a situation of great suffering arises from that, because every human in a normal sort of situation needs to be heard. Just want to go silent a little bit. Every human wants to be understood, and I know that that can be a very tall order, because unless we're walking in the shoes of someone else, so unless you become homeless, you can't know my experience. Unless you find yourself without money, you can't know my experience. Unless you've gone to jail, let's say falsely accused, let's say you're innocent, you can't know what that's like, what that must be like when those doors close behind you. We can't know what it's like to walk in the shoes of another. We can only imagine, and that can at least move us towards some form of compassion towards that other. It's a reaching out to them. When I was young, I did consider being a counsellor because I knew I was good at it, because I had a natural affinity for people. I was always feeling the people. And naturally, I would move toward them and imagine what it must be like for them. I'm also a problem solver, so I have an ability to try and work out the problem, because I don't believe we can solve anything until we really get to the core essence of each problem. So from a societal point of view, we're in a society that's completely in denial of its emotional state of being. That's why we've got a lot of mental health issues, 1 in 5 in the society. That is an indictment, and it's reflective of a society that's not responding in healthy ways to each other. The projection of power is extremely unhealthy. When groups form who have considerable concentration of power and influence, and who are able to affect events on the basis of their standing. Equality before the law has to become embedded in our society at every level, not just as a statutory or a regulatory or a legal legislative statement written into some legislation. Equality before the law means fairness. It means I'm willing to listen to you without my own story. I'm not going to listen to all the gossip around this, where one party is seeking to undermine your status in order to win the case. I am going to look into the truth of this matter from all sides, because I know that when justice occurs, healing occurs. The imagery of the woman holding the scales of justice is no mistake. Because we women, you could say, have experienced much injustice and inequality, definitely. And it was embedded inequality. We didn't even know that as children. I didn't know. I just noticed that the boys were more robust and they got away with a lot more. There was an expectation that girls had to cross their legs, girls had to behave better than boys. If they didn't, they were very much ridiculed or punished. So there were higher standards for girls in actual fact. Girls also were better behaved because they tended to conform as well. Maybe that was because of those standards that were there. But we didn't really want to cause problems and hurt people. And that's not to say that girls are better than boys. I really don't want boys to think that I'm saying that. I'm not. There are differences here. Girls tend to be more emotional. Girls can also be more nasty too. They can be psychologically more clever. So I'm always, you could say I'm a little bit uncomfortable if I favour one over the other, and that's part of the reason why I have a sense of fairness within me, a sense of justice within me, because I want to be fair to both parties. And there are times I can be biased because I haven't communicated enough to the other party to understand their viewpoint. So I might have unquestioned biases sitting within me that are not recognised. So that would be in the unconscious bias. So the woman that's holding the scales, Lady Justice, she's also standing in New York Harbour. Statue of Liberty came from France. Liberté. That means freedom. The scales is about weighing competing sides. It's not about shutting one side down through legislation. It's not about raiding media outlets and covering information. It's not about stacking judicial processes by those who can afford lawyers and those who can't. It's not about creating courts for the many and allowing the few to get away with crimes. The woman standing is symbolic of the feminine. And the feminine is receptive. The feminine is feeling. She's feeling for the truth. So the truth is actually not a factual exercise. It's an intuitive feel. Because even as I'm speaking now, I'm going into my feeling. I'm just not closing my eyes, but I am going there. I'll close my eyes now. You have to be extremely evolved to be a judge. You have to be extremely wise to be in a position like this. And it should never, ever be by appointment, by political appointment. We saw that in the United States. I'm sure it happens here too. They are lawyers who become appointed as judges. Do I agree with that? Not necessarily, because of the adversarial nature of the legal profession. That is making exorbitant amounts of money. That's become a money-making business. And then with that concentration of power, with that influence, many lawyers end up in politics. So the legal profession needs to come under the light of inquiry. I have witnessed a lawyer lying in court. So ethics becomes an important aspect, values become an important aspect in the legal profession. So people should be rewarded on the basis of human rights, on the basis of standing up for presenting a case that protects the human rights of a person. If a lawyer is representing someone they know to be lying, who is trying to put a case forward that they're not, I believe that lawyer should just speak the truth in that hearing. When a lawyer actually knows that their client is lying and seeking a smaller term or seeking some sort of softening of a verdict, then that lawyer is aiding and abetting that activity of that person. It actually merges with criminal behaviour. But the profession itself would say I'll ignore all of that, just win the case, because we want to make money. We're a law firm. So there's, again, that idea that the emotional disconnect is acceptable, providing the money is made. And this is how money corrupts, and this is how power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. This is the real distortion that's really at play in our world, which is at the core of a lot of conflict. Fairness, people don't mind if they have to wear a consequence if they know that they've been treated in fairness. They might deny it for a while, but contemplating, even if they're in jail, they can be contemplating, go, well, maybe I have to accept that I really could have done this differently. I mean, I would have programs in jail of role modelling, not mind control, not, you know, how they have in certain cultures, they send them off to camps for re-education. I don't believe in any of that. But I'm talking about values and ethics. I was a teacher of values. That's not telling them what to think or how to do. It's about reconnecting them experientially with their felt, their emotional array, and becoming familiar with it. The real hope stuff, which I've talked about in many videos, responsibility, empathy, awareness, love, honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment, and service, is about looking through values in order to address matters. So a person who's done something that's harmed another, how would they see through responsibility the ability to respond, I can do something? So rather than feeling desperate, rather than feeling they had no power, they actually could have taken a more creative approach to that problem, which caused no harm. If they were empathetic, they would say, well, I'm not going to hit out at that person, because how would I feel if I was them? How would they be feeling? It's going to crush them, destroy them. I could be that person. That's empathy. Awareness is, okay, I'm really upset and distressed because I've lost my job and I'm fearful that I'm not going to get anywhere and I'm a failure, and all these things connect to that. I'm aware that I am beating up on myself, and then I'm taking it out on someone else. Love. If I look at the matter through love, can I love what is? Can I accept that I've lost this job, that maybe this is the best outcome for me? Maybe I do need time out of work. Maybe I need to sit and think. Maybe something better's coming. I'm free. Yes, there's no money to pay the bills, it's true, but, you know, is the world over? No, it's not. I can get food parcels. See, creativity opens up, and this is when you open your mind, it's like it opens up to other things. Honesty. Well, am I being honest about this? Well, I lost the job. Well, why did I lose it? Because I got angry at the boss because I haven't really dealt with emotions that I've got within myself. I haven't thought through, what was it? He was like a father figure. I was reacting to that, thinking that he was putting me down, and he wasn't. When I question doing the work of Byron Katie, I sit there and question the story, I realise it's my own problem projected onto him, and I got angry and blamed him. See, that's where values take you. You know, honesty, oneness, we're one. How did he feel when I got angry? You know, how does my wife feel, or husband, or whomever, when I take it out on them because I'm frustrated? What would peace do? The yin and the yang of it. Life is contrast. Okay, I lost my job. That was the contrast, which has now catapulted me into something else that I actually want to do. That's the yin and the yang of it. Could be the dark and the light of it, the anger and the love of it. It's contrasts that push us forward. And we've got enjoyment. Well, let's look at the sunny side. Don't have to get up at 6. I can sleep in. That's great. I can go and sit in the sun with a coffee and enjoy myself. So you can see, just even going through those values, how I'm now looking at a problem, imagining that problem differently when I have the tools and the skills to do it. The last one, of course, of real hopes is their service. I can say to someone in the future, well, I've been there. I lost my job and I survived. It's okay. That's being of service to the other, and this is what I did. See, we don't have these tools. Instead, we shut everything down we don't want to hear. We condemn those people who we say are wrong. It's coming from this moral, right versus wrong, you're unreformable. That's when we take it to another level. It's not a question of they're unreformable. Everybody can change, but they have to see. They have to have an insight into why I did this. Why did I react that way? It came up so fast. Often there's crimes of passion. Came up so fast they couldn't even stop it because they had shoved it down and shoved it down and shoved it down. So again, going back to the freedom of expression, the media laws. And of course, the media are really speaking the truth about everything, and they're not always doing that either. They're also often, because of the ownership of media, are providing stories that have been okayed by that editor. And they may avoid exposing some things that really need to be discussed in the public interest. Because if you look at letters to the editor, what my father was doing, that's a whole different narrative to an article in a paper. This is actually people really speaking truthfully, and they are critiquing far more than a newspaper editor or article would reveal. Because the news media has to be very careful because there's legal issues. You see, people will sue them at a drop of a hat. And this is where the legal profession has not served our society, because they would encourage this legality. Litigation, it's called. This comes from the United States, which we've been heavily influenced by, much more than England. When I lived in England, I really saw that because the English didn't have any American programming, I noticed. And they were very much having their own. And I saw the difference. There was more innocence in the people. Here in Australia, we've become more Americanised. And that's coming in through this digital media. And a lot of it, in my opinion, there's a lot of violence in it. I find that really concerning because I don't want a violent society. I want stories that are uplifting and inspiring, and I want my own culture too, because I'm growing up in Australia. You know, we're seeing less and less Australian programming, and that's to do with money. They're getting cheap programming in. But we're not thinking about, well, who are we? What's our identity? What's important to us? Because we're not being heard. It's all becoming about the money. And where the money flows, corruption goes, in my opinion. I'm seeing more and more that this total focus on money making, which is what that young girl, Swedish girl, Greta, talked about. All you think about is money. She's absolutely 100% correct. I've worked in companies, I've seen it's all about the bottom line, definitely. And then we get the politicians talking about the budget and they talk about the money. They see the books are balanced. Well, there's questions around that. I certainly have big questions around equity financing and where that shows up in the budget when we're doing all these huge infrastructure projects. How is that benefiting the society when people like myself are homeless? I don't get anything. You know, I even got a speeding ticket recently, and I truthfully went to that intersection. I misjudged. And I believe I went on the amber. I wouldn't have gone on the red. I know that because I definitely would have stopped. But I misjudged it. And I went through, and I think it changed as I was going through. That's my recollection. But I sped up because I didn't want to get a red light. And then I got a speed camera. And it was like, you can't win. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Is there two lights on the intersection? So if I slowed down, would I have got a red light? I don't have the money. I don't have any money to pay the fine because I have no income, apart from what my mother sends me, $35 a week. That's it. So what happens with that? And then I get a fine, and it's threatening. It's like, if you don't pay, you know, and it's like a huge amount of money, $355 for 10 kilometres. And I only sped up because, firstly, it was to do with safety. You had to get through the intersection. And I didn't want a red light because I can't afford it. Very simple. And they know that. And then the question of, well, you know, what am I to do with that? And then I get another notice, which actually adds on $25 for that notice for the next one, saying you haven't paid. So we're going to charge you more. Couldn't believe it. And then there's a threat, if you don't pay, they're going to send a sheriff around. They're going to take your things. It's like, this is like people, these strangers coming into your place and stealing your things because you're in poverty. Or, I mean, a lot of people are working poor now. They're trying to, because everything's becoming users pay because the government's not funding the public services. And then the public have to wear more and more costs. And then what happens? They fall into poverty. We're starting to see extremes happening here. We're starting to see the middle class going south, is the way I'd call it. So going into poverty. The middle class is your stabiliser in an economic system. When they start becoming pauperised, which is what's happening, that's where you get social instability. So when you get huge fines like this, which I don't believe are fair at all, I think they're way too expensive. What do poor people do in that scenario? I have to go to court. The community have to pay for that. Is that fair on the community when I'm willing to do community service? I don't agree with the fine. I certainly don't agree that I sped. I believe the circumstances in which I was in forced me to speed so that I didn't break a law. So in my opinion, I just felt I couldn't win either way. It just seemed to me that the money is what it's about. You know, so we're seeing the corporatisation of a lot of public services now. Becomes money-making exercise. So what of the people? What of the stress that causes? You know, do you go to jail if you can't pay? Does that criminalise you? I was told recently that if you don't pay a fine, that when they do a check on a police check, apparently that shows up like as if you've done something wrong, when it's just poverty. I mean, I'm all for safety, road safety, but I don't necessarily believe, and I'm certainly not convinced, that there is a really deep value of road safety behind this. When I was researching the speed cameras, I found out they're making $1 million a year each. How is that fair? And does that money go back into non-violence? I can't even get work as a peacemaker. The irony of it, my whole life is dedicated to non-violence. I dreamed I was teaching peace. This is not just a wistful decision that, oh, let's make the world a beautiful place and wear a lot of flowers and go dancing on the green grass. I dreamed I was teaching peace, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I rang a friend the next day and I said, who teaches peace? He goes, oh, because he was a teacher. I said, do you teach peace? He says, oh, we do social studies. We teach war and peace. But I said, was there a dedicated subject to peace itself? And he goes, no. So I then wrote programs, peace education, Real Hopes is one of them. You can go to my website, www.worldpeacefull.com. Now, peace is not some wistful, idealistic, floaty notion at all. It's actually our nature. You look at children, for the most part, they're peaceful. Yes, they cry and they get upset. They have the emotions. We're all meant to have that. But on the whole, children are very sweet and very innocent. There's a peacefulness when you're around them and playing with them. Our nature is peace. We are drawn to peace. It is about making peace with where you are, making peace with who you are. It's not about disrupting other human beings because you want to take the money. We've created a whole economic drama around ourselves where it's all about taking the money. Well, one way or another, we take the money. This does not teach us to give to one another. It doesn't teach exchange. I was going to bring up Rotary because that just came into my mind. They did the exchange programs with the foreign youth, and Australian youth used to go overseas and exchange with other countries. So we would then take on their youth and they would get to experience Australia. I like that program with Rotary, actually, the youth exchange. See, some of the service clubs will engage in activities where we're actually helping one another to learn and to grow. But with the economic system overlaid on our lives, it's just becoming, I think, out of control, the greed, which is what I talked about in my other video. And then we have whole stories around why people have to pay. But there's no empathy. There's no standing in the shoes of that single mother or that family that are struggling, or even the conscientious objector who says, I don't think that's a fair price. We would say, oh, well, bad luck. It's in legislation, you have to pay. The judge is not going to listen to you. So where's the fairness again? So we come back full circle to the importance of fairness in order for people to feel resolved. We're not resolving our conflicts. We're ignoring them. We're enshrining things in legislation to force people to comply. We're creating IT environments where it's all about say yes, comply. You need to read the terms and conditions. They're too convoluted. Most people won't get it. And if you don't agree with those terms and conditions, you don't get access. That is not inclusivity. That is not respecting difference of opinion. That is weighting the game like the horse race where it's all your way or the highway. That is lack of respect for other people. And because we're dealing in disconnected states of being where we're not in front of one another, I get letters, I communicate through email, but I'm not sitting in front of that person actually pleading my case or making my point. So they're never going to hear me. They're just going to see me as another letter. Oh, well, we'll just tell her that section blah, blah, blah says this, you have to comply, or we take you to court. You do it our way or not at all. Is that fair? Is that going to heal the constant sense of powerlessness that everybody is feeling because they're not heard? So I'm going to finish on that note because I think that's where I started and that's where I need to finish. My videos are about being heard because I haven't been heard. And it's not just about watching these videos in order to create, in some cases, a legal case or trying to find a legislative means of causing more harm. I'm asking all who listen to my videos and watch this to sit with me, to drop the story, to seek for your own truth. Is that true from your point of view or not? And that's okay if it's not, because I'm not here telling you how to think. I'm expressing how I think so that people are aware. I'm doing it as service, above self. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow. That's what I totally believe in. If these videos serve you, then I'm extremely happy because that's what they're for. If they don't, that's okay too. It means you're not meant to hear this. But I'm always open to hearing you, and people can feel free to connect. Obviously, if a million emails come, it's going to be very hard to write back. But let's just say if we connect and we're in front of each other, I will be deeply listening for truth. And that's how I heal the planet in my own way. Anyway, take care. Much love. Bye.